Well, they're calling it Ukraine's zombie army. Ukrainian men riddled with HIV, mental disorders, tuberculosis, and more being listed as fit for duty, fit for military service, zombies that they can basically throw into the meat grinder as cannon fodder. And now Europe is getting involved in this. Remember all those military-age men, those refugees who fled Ukraine to Poland and other countries throughout Europe and the West? Well, now Ukraine is asking those countries, please send those men back. We need those men. We need those men to fight and die on the front lines. Poland leading that charge. Poland says it will round up Ukrainians of military age and extradite them in order to send them to war. Mike Krupa is a Polish journalist, historian, and host of Vodom TV, and he joins us from Warsaw, Poland today. Mike, good to see you.
Good to see you. Hi, Clinton. Good to be back.
Yeah, this is a stunning turn of events, a stunning story. And I have to wonder how many other European countries are quietly doing this, or maybe will even publicly do this, send Ukrainian men they know they are harboring back to Ukraine because Ukrainians asking for that. But I want to focus specifically on the Polish side because we have confirmation from the Polish government and from the newspaper Rzeczpospolita. Am I saying that correctly? The newspaper.
Rzeczpospolita. Yeah,
I was
pretty
never
good
going to
for
get
an
that.
American living in Portugal. So that's good enough. Good enough.
So they say about 80,000 Ukrainians are unaccounted for, having crossed into Poland, and they are ready to send these men back to Poland. This is back to Ukraine. This is stunning, Mike.
Yeah, from the reporting that initially came out of Rzeczpospolita, they were the first ones to actually report on this, that Poland was actually taking action to get these guys back to Ukraine. It seems that around 80,000, just north of 80,000 Ukrainians who are eligible to be mobilized are in Poland, but the question is, how do we find them now? Now, the way that the newspaper explained how they would go about is the Ukrainians would have to basically produce international arrest warrants that would be transferred to Interpol. Interpol would then be the primary source, for example, for a Polish police officer stopping, for example, a car in Poland and asking for Ukrainian ID. And if they were in the system, they would be sent to the prosecutor's office, and the Polish court at the end of the day would be the one to decide their fate. Last year, by the way, that same Rzeczpospolita, they reported, it was about the same time, basically beginning of September, end of August, pretty much, that around 500,000 Ukrainians that were eligible to serve in the Ukrainian army crossed into Poland. Now, that doesn't mean that they stayed in Poland, but they crossed the Polish border. Where they are right now is anyone's guess. That number of 80,000 was provided by the border guard. So it's based on their statistics and from what they're seeing, and I'm guessing from the sources that they're getting from Kiev, that this is about the number of or in military aid, so to say, that could be transferred back to Ukraine, to the front line, essentially. But the question is, how do we find them in Poland right now?
That is unbelievable. So international arrest warrants. And now this is an unbelievable burden on the Polish government. It was already an unbelievable burden on the Polish government to have all of these refugees in Poland, but now being sort of tasked and forced to send out police to try to track these people down if they're in hiding now and use police resources in order to find these individuals?
I don't think there's going to be a concerted effort whereby there's going to be, Operation Find the Ukrainian in Poland, so to say. But I think that based on the source, the Interpol source, where all the names of these guys are going to be based, should they find, for example, a guy working in construction, or they pull somebody over on the street and they say, okay, you're on that list, then we have to send notification to the prosecutor's office, and then the court will decide whether we're going to send you back to Ukraine or not. Because a lot of these guys, as the Ukrainian David Arahamia, the MP who came out with this proposition, he stated that a lot of them left Ukraine because basically they bribed somebody to come into Poland. Now, I can tell you from the amount of luxury cars that I'm seeing, especially in Warsaw, but also in other major cities like Wrocław or Kraków, you don't see those kind of cars, riding around in Polish streets, even in the bigger cities. So it's, Porsche, Lamborghinis, for example, the higher end Mercedes. So it was kind of surprising to see how these guys managed to escape. And I'm guessing that most of them were between the age of 18 and 60. So they were eligible for military service. Now, the question is that everybody is asking themselves right now, are they going to be doing more bribing in Poland in order to make sure that the Polish cops and the Polish, the authorities leave them alone to not give them a court notification to send them back or, remain in Poland.
Right. It's unbelievable. Now, Mike, I don't know if you recall this. Here was a New York Times graph. We covered this on the show at the time, back in early part of February or into March, when you had all of these refugees fleeing into Poland and other parts of Europe. And the way that the New York Times portrayed it was, you had millions or so leaving. In the graph, they had about 499,000, and they called them refugees. Right, leaving Ukraine, going into Europe, those were refugees. But if you left Ukraine and you went into Russia, you were labeled a migrant. And they put it in really small print in their little New York Times graph, and they made it the color the arrow black, like you're going to seek refuge basically in Russia, but you'll be labeled a migrant, and otherwise you're a refugee going to these other countries, and you need our love and support. And now it seems, correct me if I'm wrong, but we don't know yet, but these migrants who went into Russia, the irony of ironies is that they may be safer, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I think it was a conscious decision on the part of a lot of mainstream, Western outlets, because how can you find refuge in Russia? I mean, the only thing you could be going to Russia for is to, get instructions from Vladimir Putin how to conduct sabotage operations in Ukraine, for example. That was the sort of underlying understanding that was being pushed, because, as you noted, the terminology was completely different. But as of today, the Ukrainians that left for Russia, the ones with the Ukrainian passports who want to remain Ukrainian citizens, whether they come back or not, but they're not the ones being mobilized. So they found safe haven in Russia, and nobody's going to be running around and, throwing them in the military, unless, for example, they want to volunteer. They could be ethnic Russians with Ukrainian passports who would want to go back to Ukraine to fight on the side of Russia against the Kiev regime. But the situation is different in Poland, because most of these guys, and, I see a lot of them on the street, they're having a good time. They're frolicking around. They're hanging out with the chicks. They're drinking beer. The last thing they want to do is to go back to Ukraine, and the very last thing they want to do is to go on, on a couple of day training course to go to the meat grinder in the Eastern Front. So it's sort of like reminiscent of what happened in World War II. The Germans always said, "I'd rather serve on a U-boat than go on the Eastern Front." Well, it's the same thing right now with these, beer drinking and fun frolicking Ukrainians who are having the time of their life in Poland right now.
Do you think that this is going to happen more broadly? We talked about it at the beginning throughout Europe, that you'll have other countries, you'll have Spain, you'll have Portugal, you'll have the UK and others that are going to say, well, Zelensky has called us and asked us to send these men back, and we need to comply, right? That's how we support their war effort, is send these men back basically to die.
I've heard some rumblings from Germany that they're already starting to do the same thing. Now, there's going to be a sort of paradox in all this, because the multicultural lobby, the liberals, the open borders crowd, although they all have Ukrainian flags on their Twitter accounts, they're going to have a sort of, they're going to be a little bit confused right now, because on the one hand, they want Ukraine to win against, Vladimir Putin. But on the other hand, how can you send these guys back to die? So they're going to turn on their, welcome refugees hats and say, no, we can't send them back. But if you don't send them back, Ukraine's going to lose. So they're going to have a paradox where they're going to mellow in their own sort of contradictions. But I'm guessing for a lot of Western European countries, this will be a justified way of sending a lot of these so-called Ukrainian refugees back, because apart from Poland, I'm hearing of a lot of stories that, these Ukrainians are causing problems in other Western European cities. As Western European countries, the best argument to send them back would be not, just forced deportation because we don't want you here, but hey, Ukraine needs you because we're all in this fight to destroy Vladimir Putin. You got to have the hands to do it, right? So go back to your country. So in a way, I think many liberals might be bought by this, in the sense that, yeah, this is the humanitarian way to send them back to Ukraine, so to say. But I think a lot of them will show their sort of, inherent stupidity by protesting the forced sending back of these guys to Ukraine, even though they're being called by Zelensky himself to come back and fight against the Russians in the east. So it's sort of a paradox, but this is where we are, I guess.
In Poland, I'm curious, what is the beat on the street there, hearing about this idea that, Poland, which had been weighted down tremendously by the burden of supporting all of these refugees, what do you think the response is going to be, just from the average Polish citizen, that these people are going to be extradited?
Well, I've seen varied comments, especially in the social media sphere, varying from, hey, Polish police, I help you catch these guys myself for free, to, well, it's kind of too late for that now because, the war has been going on. This should have been policy from February 24th. I mean, no matter what you think of the Kiev regime, but with an open borders policy essentially up until today, because it'll be hard to implement it one way or another. But you should have been checking these guys from the very start, from February 24th. And I've always been saying, even before the war, when we were having the slow influx of about 2 million Ukrainians coming into Poland, formal migrants, obviously, as cheap labor, I was saying, well, there's a frozen conflict in Ukraine. If we're accepting all these men, we're in essence weakening Ukraine, so we're weakening our cause. So either we're only using Ukraine or we're genuinely stupid because we're depriving them of the manpower that they need to fight the Russians in the east. So a lot of people are sort of poking fun at this right now in Poland, although in general there is an agreement that, this should have been the policy from the beginning, that these guys should not be let in and they should remain in Ukraine if we are sincerely trying to back, Ukraine's defense against so-called imperialist Russia. So that's sort of the vibes that I'm getting from what I'm seeing in Poland.
Be interesting to see who foots the bill for this. I mean, you're not just going to drive one individual back to Ukraine. You can get buses, or you're going to have escorts, airplanes are going to be transporting these individuals. Somebody's going to be footing the bill for this. This is not going to be a cheap operation.
Well, I think you're looking at one of those guys who's going to be footing the bill. So I'm right here, unfortunately.
Yeah. I'm sure that's the case. Poland and of course NATO and the United States will be sending in taxpayer dollars as well. Mike Krupa, great to see you. Thank you so much for your insights from Poland. This is an unbelievable story. Thank you so much.
Thanks again, Clayton.
Unbelievable is right. What happened to the West as this savior of Ukraine?
Right.
We were so proud of ourselves.
The refugee home. You come here, get your, donate clothing and all of these things.
Yeah. All the clothing drives and everything. We were so happy for these families to bring them into, they got fast passes to visas. We got to bring them into entire family sponsorships.
When you say
we in the West,
okay, just be careful.
Western
people
media.
are always like, Natalie, why? No. Yes, the collective West. There was all this virtue signaling, people putting their profile pictures. We're doing. Oh yeah, what about all the Kenyan families? What about all the Yemenis families? What about all the Syrian families? Oh no, we don't care about them. But if they're Ukrainian, yes, if they're white skinned, we will take them in and take care of them.
But we cared enough. We had moms groups that were asking for things, saying, "Oh, we got a Ukrainian family and we need a car seat," and I had some extras. So yes, absolutely, you can have my car seat. I care about everybody equally, and so I absolutely don't want these families that are here now to be sent back any more than I want any refugee from Syria to be sent back. I don't want that. And so that rings so hollow if you were someone who was so excited to put on your profile picture how generous the West was, and then can, find a way to look the other way when we need to deport them to go back to war. It's awful.
But how in the world do they know every single Ukrainian that's there? If they just tear up their papers, how are they going to know they're Ukrainian? Do they have them in specific places and track them,
no.
trackers on them?
What they have said is
what we talked about in the interview is specifically that's what one of the questions I asked him was about, if you have this sort of international arrest warrant that's available, then Interpol or whatever will, if they apply for a job, et cetera, then that will be sort of run through the database there, and they'll be able to say, wait a second, you're coming up in this database. We can't exactly give you this job. You're wanted back in Ukraine, and we need to contact the authorities. So that was my question too, is how much money is it going to cost the West to try to go after these individuals and round them up?
The Polish police spokesperson said, for example, during a simple check on the road, they could just be pulling people over, can papers please type thing. Ironically enough, I don't know if you recall, do we have the image of the Wall Street Journal, had told us that people who were fleeing west to European countries were refugees, but there were hundreds of thousands who went to Russia, and they just called them migrants. And so...
Yeah, that's what I just asked Mike as well.
Right.
It's it's a crazy thing to see it's a New York Times graph that we talked about.
Right.
But it's like this entire arrow of going left is you're a refugee and you need to be saved. And if you're on the right side there, it's in black. It's a black arrow. It's you're a migrant. Look at the color characteristics there too. It's like you're just like a little migrant on the right hand side. But if you're this orange arrow, you need to be saved by the West.
Well, interestingly enough, now which of those groups of people will be less likely to be deported for war now?
Yeah.
I mean, we don't know if those people have been offered citizenship. A lot of them did accept passports, so they are at risk of mobilization in the same way that all Russians are. But they won't be stopped at a traffic stop and then sent back to war.
Yeah.
So
I just hope there's some countries that are just going to be like, nope, we're not on board.
We're not doing
and
that.
And then they can go there. Yeah, we're not sending them back. We're not extraditing or whatever.
Well, let's talk about this story in Ukraine. Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. You should also come over and join our community of Redacted Rebels over at redacted.inc. That's our private locals community where we can share exclusive content that we simply cannot share here on YouTube. Come over and join the rebellion together right now by going to redacted.inc. We'll see you next time.